The wind in this part of Wyoming did not whisper. It scoured. It scraped the dry dirt from the plains and threw it against the graying boards of the ranch house. Clara Bellamy stood on the porch, holding a cracked porcelain mug of coffee she could no longer afford. The coffee was thin and bitter, boiled twice from old grounds, but it was warm. At 27, she felt as worn and faded as the house her father had built. It had been 6 months since they buried him, and 3 months since the last ranch hand, a decent man named Eli, had packed his saddlebags. Eli had looked at her with pity, his eyes apologizing. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Bellamy. I got a family in Cheyenne. I can't fight Mr. Lawton. Nobody can." Now, she ran the ranch alone, or what was left of it. The Bellamy spread had once covered 5,000 acres. Now, the fences were down. The creek was running low, and only 3 horses and a dozen head of bony cattle remained. Clara was resilient. She had survived her husband's slow, whiskey-soaked decline and the silent grief that followed. She had buried her father, a man hard as ironwood, after his suspicious fall from a canyon ridge. But resilience was a finite resource, and hers was running as dry as the creek bed. She was exhausted. Her hands, once smooth, were scarred and calloused from mending tack and stretching barbed wire. She finished the coffee and stepped back inside, the slam of the screen door echoing in the empty house. The silence was the worst part. It was a hungry thing, swallowing the memory of her father's loud laugh and the stomp of boots on the porch. She was checking the feed bin in the barn, down to the last scrapes, when the sound of approaching riders made her spine stiffen. She did not reach for the shotgun leaning against the wall. She already had her father's Colt revolver tucked into the waistband of her denim trousers, the leather worn smooth. 2 men reined in, careful to stay just outside the shadow of the barn. She recognized them. Silas Croft and a younger, nervous-looking rider named Pete. They worked for Rex Lawton. Silas smiled, a greasy movement of his lips that never reached his cold eyes. He sat his horse easy, a man comfortable with delivering bad news. "Afternoon, Mrs. Bellamy. Mighty warm day for this much work. You look tired." Clara kept her hand low, near the butt of the revolver. "What do you want, Silas?" "Just paying a social call," he said, removing his hat in mock courtesy. "Mr. Lawton. He's a generous man. He heard you were struggling out here, alone. It's a dangerous place for a woman by herself. Accidents happen." The word hung in the air, thick and foul. Accidents. "My father's death was no accident," Clara said, her voice low and steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Silas's smile widened. "That's a terrible thing to say. Old man Bellamy, he just missed his footing. Tragic. But it proves my point. This land is too much for you. Mr. Lawton's offer still stands. $500 for the deed. Cash, enough to get you back east where you belong." $500 for land worth 10 times that. It was theft dressed up as charity. "The answer is the same as it was last month. This ranch is not for sale." Silas sighed, his gaze drifting to the weak fence line. "Stubbornness is an ugly trait in a woman. Clara, Mr. Lawton, he's been patient. He's tried to be neighborly, but his patience is wearing thin. You've got a week, 1 week to sign the papers. After that," he shrugged, a gesture more threatening than any curse. "Well, more accidents. Fires, maybe. Cattle go missing. Wells turn foul. It'd be a shame." The younger rider, Pete, looked at the ground, shifting in his saddle. "Get off my land," Clara said. Silas's smile vanished. The mask of courtesy was gone. "You're making a mistake. You have nothing left, no one to help you. Your father's friends are gone. Your money's gone. You're just one woman standing in the way of progress." "I said, get off my land." She drew the Colt. Her hand was shaking, just slightly, but the barrel aimed true at his chest. Silas chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He held his hands up. "No need for that. We're going, but you think on it. Clara, 1 week. After that, we won't be asking polite." He and Pete wheeled their horses and kicked them into a gallop, disappearing in a cloud of alkali dust. Clara stood there for a long time, the heavy revolver sagging in her hand. The shaking started in her knees and spread up, until her whole body trembled. She didn't lower the gun until they were a mile gone. She holstered the weapon and leaned her forehead against the rough wood of the barn. They were right. She was alone. The ranch hands her father had trusted, men who had eaten at their table for 10 years, had all drifted away. Some had been bought off by Lawton, given jobs on his massive, sprawling cattle empire. Others had been scared off, families threatened, wagons tampered with. Her money was almost gone. The small stash her father kept hidden in the floorboards was down to $20 and change. Enough for flour, beans, and coffee for another month. Perhaps, but not enough for wire, not enough for feed, and certainly not enough to hire a new hand, even if she could find one brave or stupid enough to defy Rex Lawton. Hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. The next day, she hitched her least weary horse to the buckboard and made the long 18-mile ride into town. The town, such as it was, bore Lawton's name on half the businesses. The Lawton Saloon, the Lawton Mercantile, even the smithy. She pulled up outside Hatcher's general store. It was one of the few places Lawton didn't outright own. But Henry Hatcher was a weak man who valued his own skin. As Clara stepped onto the boardwalk, she felt the familiar chill. The townsfolk, Mrs. Davies, the banker's wife, who was inspecting a bolt of calico near the window, turned and saw her. Mrs. Davies didn't smile. She just offered a tight, pitying nod, and then turned abruptly back to her fabric, whispering something to the woman beside her. Clara pushed the door open, the bell jangling loudly in the quiet store. "Mister," Hatcher was behind the counter, polishing a glass jar. He was a small man with a thin mustache that twitched when he was nervous. It was twitching now. "Mrs. Bellamy," he said, his voice barely audible. "Henry, I need supplies." She slid her small list onto the counter. Flour, beans, salt, a small sack of oats for the horses. Hatcher didn't look at the list. He kept his eyes on the jar he was wiping. "Clara, just put it on my account. Henry, I'll settle up when I sell the last of the cattle." "That's just it," he whispered, finally looking at her. His eyes were desperate. I can't extend you any more credit." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. The other women in the store stopped whispering. The silence was absolute. "What are you talking about? My father had an account here for 20 years, and it's a full account. Clara, a full and past due account. I'm sorry. Mr. Lawton's man. He stopped by yesterday. He bought the note. He holds your debt now. And he told me, in no uncertain terms, no more credit for you." Humiliation burned, hot and sharp, in Clara's throat. It was one thing to be threatened in private, on her own land. It was another to be shamed here, in public, declared a pauper by the man trying to steal her home. She was a lost cause, a woman too stubborn and proud to know when she was beaten. "I see," she said, her voice stiff. She pulled the last of her cash from her trouser pocket and slapped it on the counter. The coins and crumpled bills looked pitiful. "Give me what this will buy." Hatcher looked at the money, then at her list. He sighed, gathered a small sack of flour, a smaller one of beans, and a paper-wrapped block of salt. It was half of what she needed. "That's all it covers. Clara." "Fine." She snatched the items, her movements jerky. She turned to leave, her face a mask of stone. She would not cry. She would not give them the satisfaction. It was in that moment, blinded by shame and anger, that she fumbled the sack of flour. It slipped from her grasp, hit the floorboards, and the string tie popped. A cloud of white dust exploded, coating her boots and the floor. A curse died in her throat. She knelt, trying to scoop the precious flour back into the ruined bag with her hands. It was useless. "Ma'am." The voice was deep and quiet. It came from beside her. She looked up. A man was kneeling opposite her. A stranger. He was tall, dressed in worn denim and a dusty brown coat. His hat was pushed back, showing dark hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left in the sun too long. There were lines around his eyes, and a faint, silver scar that ran from his temple to the edge of his jaw. He looked tired as she felt, but his eyes were the color of a winter sky, and they held the flat, still look of a man who had seen too much. This was Jack Morrow, though she did not know his name. He had ridden into town an hour before, his horse favoring its left foreleg, his saddle worn to suede. He was seeking nothing but anonymity, a place where he could work with his hands and forget the smell of gunpowder and the weight of a gun. He was running from a past that clung to him like mud. He said nothing else. He simply took the ruined bag from her, managed to retie it, saving what was left. Then he stood, walked to the counter, and placed a 50-cent piece on the wood. "Another sack of flour." "For the lady," he said to Hatcher. Hatcher looked at the stranger, at the worn gun belt he wore high on his hip, and nodded quickly. Grabbing a new sack, Jack picked up the bag and handed it to Clara. Their fingers brushed. His hand was rough, calloused like her own. Clara stood, clutching the new sack. She looked at the stranger, confused and wary. No one helped her. I don't have the money to repay you." "It's not a loan, ma'am," Jack said, his voice flat. He had overheard the entire exchange with Hatcher. He had seen the whispers, the pity, the humiliation. He recognized the look in her eyes. It was the look of an animal trapped, desperate and dangerous. He tipped his hat, a short, respectful gesture, and walked out of the store. The jingle of his spurs the only sound. Clara watched him go, then gathered her meager supplies and walked out, her back straight, leaving the whispers and the spilled flour behind her. Jack Morrow found lodging not in the saloon, but in an abandoned line shack 3 miles out of town, on the edge of a dry wash. It was just 4 walls and a leaky roof, but it was quiet. It was far from people. He spent the afternoon repairing the roof and clearing out the pack rat nests. He was tending to his horse when a rider approached. It was Silas Croft. Silas had seen the new man in the saloon, nursing a beer, asking no questions and answering none. A man like that was either a drifter or a gunslick. Lawton could use either. "Looking for work, stranger?" Silas called out, stopping his horse a polite distance away. Jack didn't stop brushing his horse. "Maybe, depending on the work. Name's Lawton, Rex Lawton. He owns most of this valley. Always looking for good men who ain't afraid of hard work. Or other things." Jack stopped. He turned slowly. He had heard the name Lawton in the general store. He had seen the woman's face when Hatcher mentioned it. "What kind of other things?" Silas smiled that greasy smile. "Protecting Mr. Lawton's property, persuading squatters to move on, that sort of thing. Pays well. $10 a week, plus bonuses." Jack looked at Silas. He saw the cruelty in the man's eyes, the casual arrogance of a bully who had the power of a rich man behind him. Jack had known dozens of men like Silas. He had worked for them, and he had killed them. He was trying to be done with all that. "I'll pass," Jack said, turning back to his horse. Silas stiffened. "Pass? That's good pay, friend. I'm not your friend, and I don't work for men who send their dogs to threaten women in general stores." Silas's hand twitched toward his gun. "You'd best watch your mouth, drifter. You don't know who you're talking to." "I know exactly who I'm talking to," Jack said, his voice still quiet, but now it had an edge of steel that cut through the evening air. He didn't turn around. "Right on." Silas stared at the stranger's back. Something in the man's posture, a stillness that was more dangerous than any threat, made him reconsider. He cursed, spat in the dirt, and wheeled his horse around. "You just made a mistake. There's only 2 sides in this valley. Stranger, Lawton's side, and the losing side." Jack watched him go, a familiar, bitter taste in his mouth. He had wanted peace. It seemed he had ridden straight into another man's war. That night, Clara fell into an exhausted sleep, the half-empty sack of flour on her kitchen table a small, temporary victory. She dreamed of her father, of him falling, his arms reaching out to her. She woke to a sound she recognized from her nightmares. A crackle, a roar, Smoke. She threw off the quilt, her heart seizing. The room was lit by a flickering, unnatural orange light. She ran to the window. The barn was a tower of fire. "No!" The word was torn from her throat. "The horses!" She grabbed the colt from the nightstand, a useless reflex, and ran barefoot from the house, heedless of the sharp rocks in the yard. The heat hit her like a fist, driving the air from her lungs. The entire structure was engulfed, flames licking 100 feet into the night sky. She could hear them, inside. Her horses, they were screaming. It was a sound of pure terror, a sound she would never forget. "I'm coming!" she cried. She ran to the huge double doors, the wood already blistering. She grabbed the handle, searing her palm, and yanked it open. A wall of black, choking smoke and cinders rolled out. She pulled her nightgown up over her mouth and plunged in. She couldn't see. The air was poison. "Bess! Samson!" She heard a whinny to her left, choked and high. She stumbled toward the stall, her lungs on fire. She found Samson, his eyes rolling white, kicking the stall door. She fumbled with the latch, the metal scalding her fingers. She got it open, slapped the horse's rump. "Go! Get out!" The horse bolted, a dark shape disappearing through the smoke. She turned, looking for Bess and the colt, but the smoke was too thick. A burning timber crashed down from the loft, blocking her path. She choked, her knees buckling. She fell to the dirt floor, her lungs burning, her vision tunneling to black. "This is it," she thought. "It's over." Suddenly, a hand grabbed the back of her nightgown, dragging her backward through the dirt and out into the night air. She was dumped unceremoniously on the ground, 10 yards from the inferno. She coughed. Great. Body-racking spasms that brought up ash and bile. She gasped at the clean, cold air, her throat raw. Jack Morrow stood over her, his face black with soot. He had seen the glow from his shack 3 miles away and had ridden his horse into the ground. He had arrived just in time to see her run inside. He didn't pause. He ripped a piece of fabric from his own shirt, dunked it in the water trough, and tied it over his face. "Stay down," he grunted, and ran back into the burning barn. Clara watched, helpless, still on her hands and knees. It felt like an eternity. She heard a crash, a scream, the horse, not the man, and then he was out again, slapping the rumps of the other 2 horses, sending them galloping into the darkness, their manes smoking. The barn roof collapsed in on itself with a deafening roar, sending a volcano of sparks into the sky. Jack staggered over to her and collapsed, his back against the water trough. Coughing hard, they sat there, 2 strangers covered in soot, and watched the last of her father's legacy burn to the ground. Dawn came slowly, painting the smoke-filled sky in shades of bruised purple and sick gray. The barn was a pile of charred, smoking timbers. Clara was still sitting in the dirt, her nightgown ruined, her hands and face smeared with black. She was numb. The tears had come and gone, leaving her hollowed out. Jack stood up. He walked a slow circle around the ruin, his eyes on the ground. He stopped, looking at the tracks in the dust leading away toward the main road. The tracks of 2 horses, Silas and Pete. He knelt, picked up an empty kerosene can that had been tossed into the weeds. He walked back and stood in front of her. Clara looked up at him, the man who had saved her, the man who had bought her flour. He looked as grim as the morning. "They'll be back," she whispered, her voice a raw croak. "Lawton, he'll keep coming until he gets it." Jack looked down at her. He saw the exhaustion, the grief, but he also saw the steel underneath it, the same steel he'd seen in the store. She was beaten, but she wasn't broken. He wanted to ride on. He wanted to leave this valley and its troubles behind. He wanted peace, but he looked at the tracks, at the burned-out barn, and at the woman who refused to run. He knew he could not go. That part of him, the part that walked away from injustice, was long dead. "You need help," he said, his voice rough. He looked at the smoking ruins, then back at her. "I'm not looking for trouble, but I'm not walking away either." Clara Bellamy watched the smoke curl from the black skeleton of her barn. had been 3 days since the fire, and the smell of ash and failure still clung to everything. She had agreed to let the stranger, Jack Morrow, stay. It was a decision born of pure desperation, not trust. She had offered him the small, abandoned line shack 1/2 mile from the house. It was barely more than a shed, but he had accepted it with a nod. He would work for his keep, meals, and a place to lay his head. She had told him, her voice flat, that she had no money for wages. He had only replied, "I'm not looking for wages, ma'am." She remained deeply suspicious. Men like him, men who drifted in with haunted eyes and guns worn low, were walking trouble. They were either running from a past or looking for a future that usually involved someone else's pain. Her husband, with his weak smiles and hidden bottles, had taught her to be wary of a man's promises. Her father's death and Lawton's relentless cruelty had taught her to be suspicious of men's intentions. Jack Morrow was a mystery she couldn't afford to solve. But the man worked. He didn't just work. He poured himself into the ranch as if he were trying to sweat out a poison. On the first day, he had rounded up the 3 terrified horses who had been hiding in a box canyon 2 miles south. Samson, her father's gelding, was still wild-eyed and shaking, his hide singed in patches. Jack spent hours with the horse, his voice a low, steady murmur, not touching him at first, just being there. He moved with a slow, deliberate calm that seemed to soothe the animal's panic. By evening, the horse was eating oats from his hand. He worked from the first hint of dawn to the last trace of light. He salvaged what timber he could from the barn's wreckage, his muscles coiling as he lifted beams that Clara couldn't have budged with a team. He began building a new, smaller corral, his hammer strokes a steady, rhythmic punctuation in the oppressive silence. He rode the fence lines, his worn saddle a familiar sight on the horizon. He found the sections Lawton's men had cut and spliced them, his hands sure and quick with the wire. He was quiet. He didn't offer small talk, and he didn't ask questions. He was respectful, always removing his hat when she brought him the midday meal, always keeping his distance. But it was his silence that unnerved her most. It felt like a held breath. Clara watched him. She would stand on the porch, her arms crossed, and observe him as he worked. She saw the careful way he moved, the economy of his motion. There was no wasted effort, and she saw other things. One evening, she brought him his dinner on the porch. He had been digging post holes for the new corral, and he was sitting on the steps, cleaning the dirt from his hands with a rag. As he reached for the plate of beans and bacon, she saw it, his left hand. It trembled, a fine, barely visible tremor that he tried to hide by making a fist. He noticed her looking. "Old injury," he said, his voice flat. He took the plate with his right hand. "A bullet?" she asked, her tone sharper than she intended. He looked up at her, his winter sky eyes meeting hers. Something like that. The sadness she had seen in the store was always there, just beneath the surface. It was a deep, settled sorrow, a haunt that sat on his shoulders like a physical weight. It was a look she recognized, a mirror of the one she saw in her own reflection when she drew water from the well each morning. This man was as broken as she was. The thought did not comfort her. It frightened her. They fell into a stark routine. They ate their evening meal on the porch, sitting 10 feet apart, the silence stretching between them. The prairie wind would pick up, and the new, raw wood of the corral would creak. It was on one of these evenings, a week after the fire, that Clara found herself speaking into the quiet. He was murdered. Jack, who had been staring out at the darkening hills, turned his head slowly. He didn't speak, just waited. "My father," she clarified, though he already knew. "It wasn't a fall. Rex Lawton offered him $500 for this ranch. My father, he had a loud laugh. He told Lawton he'd sooner sell his own soul. He said this land was Bellamy land, and it would be Bellamy land when Lawton was rotting in an unmarked grave." She picked at a splinter on the porch rail. A week later, his horse came back without him. The sheriff found him at the bottom of Stone Creek Ravine, said he must have been drinking, missed his footing in the dark. "My father hadn't touched whiskey in 20 years. Not since my husband. Not in a long time." She looked at Jack, her eyes hard and dry. "The sheriff works for Lawton. The judge, too. Lawton paid for the church bell. He owns the saloon. This whole valley is his. And he wants this. He wants this last piece because my father was the only one who ever told him no." Jack absorbed this. He nodded slowly, as if she had just confirmed something he had long since concluded. "I figured as much. Lawton's man offered me a job the day I rode in. $10 a week to persuade squatters." "Why didn't you take it?" Clara asked. "It's more than I can offer." "I told you," Jack said, turning his gaze back to the horizon. "I'm not looking for trouble." "You seem to have found it anyway," she said bitterly. He was silent for a moment. "Seems I did." The quiet settled again. But it was different. She had shared the poison. She had given it a name. "What about you, mister?" "Morrow?" she asked, her voice softer. "What trouble are you running from?" He stiffened. She saw his shoulders tense under the worn cotton shirt. He traced the rim of his tin plate with his thumb. "I wasn't always just a hand," he said, his voice so low she had to lean forward to hear it. "I rode with an outfit back in Kansas. After the war, we were guns for hire." He paused, and she could hear the effort it took for him to continue. "At first, it was just range disputes, guarding herds. Then it got different. We were working for rich men like Lawton, clearing homesteaders off land the railroad wanted, changing brands. It was ugly work, but it paid." He stopped, his jaw tight. "It went too far. There was a family, a farmer. He wouldn't leave. He fired on us. So our leader, he ordered us to burn the house." Jack's voice was a rasp. They barred the door. We burned it with them still inside. A man, his wife, 2 children." Clara felt a cold sickness in her stomach. "I walked away that night," Jack whispered. "I turned my horse and I rode until it foundered. I've been riding ever since. I've been trying to wash that smoke off me for 5 years." He wouldn't look at her. He just stared at his own hands, the left one trembling, the right one clenched into a white-knuckled fist. That night, the dream came again. Clara was in the barn, but it was her father, not the horses, she was trying to save. The flames were licking at his boots, and he was reaching for her, his face contorted in a silent scream. But it wasn't her father's face, it was her husband's, his mouth open, the smell of whiskey and ash choking her. She woke up with a strangled cry, her heart hammering so hard it hurt her chest. The small house was black and silent, the emptiness pressing in on her. She was slick with sweat. She couldn't breathe. She threw off the thin blanket and stumbled outside, desperate for clean air. The moon was nearly full, washing the wounded ranch in a ghostly silver light, and she saw him. Jack was sitting on the top step of the porch, his rifle resting across his knees. He wasn't asleep. He was watching the darkness, his body still, his attention fixed on the road. He heard her bare feet on the porch boards but didn't turn. "Bad dreams?" he asked the night. "Yes," she whispered. She sat on the porch swing, pulling her father's old wool coat, which she used as a robe, tightly around her. "The fire. They fade," he said, his voice still low, "but they never go away." They sat in the silvered silence. The only sound was the chirp of crickets and the soft sigh of the wind through the cottonwoods by the creek. "Why are you out here?" she finally asked. "Just watching." He gestured with his chin toward the road. "Your friend Lawton seems to like working at night. Figured I'd wait up." He was standing guard. While she slept, he had been out here, a solitary protector. The realization undid something deep inside her, a knot of fear and loneliness she had held for so long. It's been months," she said, her voice thick and unsteady, "since I haven't been completely alone here. After my father, every night, I'd sit at the window with his shotgun, just waiting. I haven't really slept, in half a year." He didn't respond. He didn't offer empty comforts or false promises. He just sat, his presence solid and unwavering, his silence which had once been so unnerving, now felt like a shield. She found herself talking. She told him about her husband, Andrew, about his kind hands and the weakness that had drowned him. She told him about the baby they had lost, a tiny girl who had lived only 2 days. She spoke of her father's stubborn pride and her own crushing fear that she was failing him. Jack listened. He just listened. He never turned, never interrupted. He simply kept his watch, a guardian in the moonlight. When she finally fell silent, the shame and relief warring inside her, he said only, "You should get some sleep, Mrs. Bellamy. I'll be out here." She went back inside, lay down on her cot, and for the first time since her father's funeral, she slept without dreaming. A few days later, they were almost out of salt and flour again. The trip to town was unavoidable. Clara hitched the buckboard, her jaw set. Jack simply came out of the line shack, his rifle in his hand. "I'll ride along," he said. It wasn't a question. Clara just nodded. The unspoken alliance between them had solidified. The town was as hostile as before. People stared. When Clara walked into Hatcher's general store, Jack remained outside, leaning against a post, his hat pulled low. He looked like a statue of judgment. Inside, Henry Hatcher sold her the supplies for cash, his hands shaking. As she was walking out, a voice stopped her. "Clara, dear." It was Beth Ann Culpepper, the preacher's wife. She had been a friend of Clara's mother, a woman who had once held Clara and patted her head. Now, she looked at Clara with an expression of profound pity and disapproval. "Beth Ann," Clara said, nodding stiffly. "My dear child, we were all just horrified to hear about the fire. Such a tragedy. The Reverend said a prayer for you." "It wasn't a tragedy, Beth Ann. It was arson. Rex Lawton's men—" Beth Ann's face tightened. She darted a nervous look past Clara, to the tall, silent figure of Jack Morrow outside. "Clara," she whispered, pulling her aside. "As a friend, as someone who cares for your soul, you must be careful. People are talking. Let them talk. No, dear, you don't understand." Beth Ann's voice was urgent. "A widow, living alone, unchaperoned, and now, with this man." Her eyes said the word was a curse. "He's a drifter. Clara, a man with a gun. It isn't proper. It isn't decent. They're saying awful things in the saloon. You are ruining what is left of your good name. You must send him away, for your own good." For a moment, Clara felt the familiar, hot sting of shame. Then it was replaced by a cold, sharp anger. "My good name," Clara said, her voice low and hard. "My good name was ruined the moment Lawton decided he wanted my land, and the rest of this town was too cowardly to stand with my father. At least Mr. Morrow is honest about who he is. He saved my life. He saved my horses. That's more than any decent person in this town has done." She stepped past the preacher's wife, who looked as if she'd been slapped. Clara walked out of the store, her head high, and climbed onto the buckboard. Jack pushed off the post and mounted his horse without a word. The ride back to the ranch was long and silent. The confrontation in town had made Clara defiant. Jack's presence was no longer just a necessity. It was a statement. She would not be cowed. The true test came 2 days later. It was the middle of the afternoon, the sun a white-hot skillet in the sky. Clara was in the kitchen, washing beans for supper. Jack was out on the south pasture, or so she thought. A sound cut through the heat, a shout, sharp and guttural. Then another, cut short. Clara's blood went cold. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the rifle from its pegs by the door and ran outside. She saw them down by the well. 2 men. She didn't recognize them. They weren't Silas or Pete. One was on the ground, face down, not moving. The other was scrambling backward on his hands and knees, his eyes wide with terror, his hands held up. Jack was standing over them. But it wasn't Jack. It was the man he had told her about. The man from Kansas. He was perfectly still, his body coiled with a lethal energy. He wasn't breathing hard. He wasn't even sweating. In his right hand, he held a heavy fence post puller, its iron head stained dark. The man on the ground, the one scrambling, tried to draw his gun. I'm just... Jack moved. It was faster than anything Clara had ever seen. He didn't draw his own pistol. He closed the distance in 2 blurring steps, and his boot smashed into the man's wrist. Clara heard the sharp, sick snap of bone. The man screamed, clutching his arm. Jack hit him. It was a single, precise, brutal strike with his left fist, to the side of the man's jaw. The sound was like a dry branch breaking. The man crumpled and lay still. Jack stood there, breathing hard now, the violence leaving him in visible waves. He looked down at the 2 men, then at his own hands. The left one was trembling violently. He dropped the fence post puller as if it were burning him. Clara walked toward him, her rifle still raised, her heart in her throat. "Jack, what happened?" He turned to her, and his eyes were flat, cold, and empty. They were the eyes of a killer. It took a full 3 seconds for him to see her, for the coldness to recede, and for the haunted, familiar man to return. "The well," he rasped, his voice hoarse. He pointed. She looked. Next to the wellhead was a half-empty burlap sack, a fine white powder spilling from a tear. "My God," she whispered. "Poison." "They were going to dump it in," Jack said. He looked at the 2 unconscious men. "Get rope. We'll take them to the sheriff." "The sheriff?" Clara said, incredulous. "He'll let them go by sundown." "I know," Jack said, his voice cold. "But we'll dump them on his doorstep. A message, to let Lawton know you're not alone anymore." That night, the air in the small house was thick and dark. They had tied the men, thrown them in the back of the buckboard, and left them on the steps of the sheriff's office with the sack of poison laid neatly on one of their chests. Now, Jack sat at her small kitchen table. Clara was pouring him coffee. His hands were clean, but she could still see the violence on him. "You were so fast," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She sat opposite him. He was cleaning his pistol, the click-click-click of the cylinder spinning the only sound. It was a nervous, practiced motion. You enjoyed it," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a question, a terrified one. He stopped. He set the gun down carefully. He stared at his own hands, resting on the table. "No," he said, his voice quiet. I saw your face, Jack," she insisted, needing to understand. "You looked... I've never seen anyone look like that. Like you were born for it, like it was easy." He finally raised his head and met her gaze. The sadness in his eyes was so profound it made her ache. "I've killed men, Clara, more than I can count, for money, for bad reasons, and once or twice for good ones. I told you what I was. You don't just unlearn that. You don't forget how... When they went for their guns, the other man, the one I'm trying to bury, he takes over." He clenched his fist, the tremble starting. "It's quick. It's precise. It's ugly. And it's the only reason you and I are still alive." He looked away, his jaw working. "I don't want to be that man again. I came here to be done with him. But Lawton, he keeps digging him up." The confession, his raw, unvarnished truth, broke the last of her suspicion. He was not a monster. He was a man fighting a monster inside himself. The next morning, the tension was gone, replaced by something else, a charge in the air, a knowledge. Clara was in the small, salvaged part of the barn. Brushing Samson, the horse was calm now, his hide healing. The rhythmic pull of the brush was soothing. She was so lost in thought. She didn't hear Jack enter. "Clara!" She jumped, spinning around. He was standing just inside the doorway, the morning light streaming past him, illuminating the million dust motes dancing in the air. They just looked at each other. He wasn't the killer from yesterday. He wasn't the haunted stranger. He was just Jack. He saw her exhaustion, her fear, and the stubborn strength that held her together. She saw his regret, his sadness, and the dangerous, quiet power he held in check. He took a step, then another. He was close now, close enough for her to smell the scent of soap and leather. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. He raised his left hand, the one that trembled. He lifted it slowly, as if fighting its weight. He didn't touch her face. He gently brushed back a strand of hair that had fallen from her braid, his calloused fingers just grazing her temple. The touch was electric. It was impulsive. It was a dam of loneliness and grief breaking in both of them at the same time. He leaned in, and she met him halfway. The kiss wasn't soft or gentle. It was fierce. It was desperate and raw. A kiss of hunger and sorrow. It was the frantic collision of two people who had been starved of kindness for so long. It tasted of ash and salt and a desperate, burning need to be seen, to be held, to not be alone. It was everything she had been terrified of, and everything she had been longing for. Then, just as quickly as it began, she tore herself away. She stumbled back, shoving him hard in the chest. She was breathing in ragged gasps, her eyes wide with a blind, animal panic. "I can't," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't." She was afraid of needing him, afraid of trusting a man who could leave her, afraid of trusting a man who could die, afraid of the killer she had seen by the well. Her husband had taught her that love was a trap, that needing someone was a weakness that would drown you. Her father's death had taught her that everyone leaves, one way or another. "I'm sorry," she choked out, turning away from him, pressing her hands to her mouth. "I can't, please." Jack stood there, his own heart hammering against his ribs. He felt the sting of rejection, but he saw the raw terror in her eyes. He understood it. He clenched his trembling hand into a fist at his side. He didn't push her. He didn't argue. He didn't try to comfort her. He just nodded, his face an unreadable mask. He turned, picked up the bridle he had come for, and walked out of the barn, leaving her alone, shaking, in the dusty light. The kiss in the barn left a new, raw silence between them. It was a line drawn in the dust, and for 3 days, neither Clara nor Jack dared to cross it. They worked. They ate their meals on the porch in the gathering dusk, the space between them humming with unspoken words. Jack was polite, his gaze careful. Clara was brittle, her orders sharp, her hands busy. She was terrified of the need he had uncovered in her, a desperate, aching void she had thought long buried. On the 4th day, Lawton changed his tactics. Clara was mending a bridle on the porch when a smart, black buggy rolled into the yard. It was not a vehicle for this part of the country. It was a city rig, polished and sprung. The man who stepped out of it wore a black worsted wool suit, a bowler hat, and a look of profound distaste for the alkali dust coating his shiny shoes. Jack emerged from the new corral, his hammer in hand, and stood, watching. The man ignored Jack completely. He walked to the porch steps and removed his hat, revealing a pale, fleshy face. "Mrs. Clara Bellamy?" he asked, his voice smooth and oiled. "I am," Clara said, not rising. "My name is Harlan Pike. I am legal counsel for Mr. Rex Lawton." He opened a leather satchel. "I am here not with an offer, Mrs. Bellamy, but with a notification. The matter of this ranch is, in fact, settled." Clara's hands went still on the leather strap. "I've told your employer, the ranch is not for sale." "That is where you are mistaken," Pike said, his tone one of forced patience. He produced a thick sheaf of papers. "This is a bill of sale, dated 3 weeks prior to your father's unfortunate passing. It confirms that Mr. Ephraim Bellamy sold the deed, free and clear, to Mr. Lawton for the sum of $500, which was paid in cash." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She stood up slowly. "That's a lie." "I assure you, it is not," Pike said, holding the paper out to her. "The document is signed by your father and witnessed by 2 men. It has been filed and recorded with the county magistrate. It is quite legal, Mr. Lawton has been extraordinarily patient, given your grief, but his patience has expired. You are, to put it plainly, trespassing. He is giving you 48 hours to vacate the premises." Clara stared at the paper. She saw the looped signature. It looked like her father's. It was a near-perfect copy, but she knew with a certainty that was cold and sharp as glass, that it was a forgery. "He never would have signed this," she whispered, her voice shaking with a sudden, cold rage. "My father would have cut off his own hand before he sold this land to that man." "Grief makes us believe many things," Pike said, his voice dripping with condescension. "The signature is valid. The magistrate has affirmed it. If you are not gone by noon on Friday, the sheriff will be here to remove you, by force, if necessary. Good day, ma'am." He placed the papers on the porch step, turned, and climbed back into his buggy, driving away without a backward glance. Clara sank onto the step. She picked up the forged document. It felt poisonous in her hands. 48 hours, the fire, the threats, the poisoning of the well. That was all just pressure. This was the knife. She was shaken to her very foundation. She had been fighting to hold on. And the law, the only thing she had left, had just declared her the criminal. Jack walked over. He stood looking down at her, his face a hard mask. "Let me see it." She handed it to him. He read it slowly, his eyes missing nothing. He noted the name of the magistrate, Judge Elias Thorne. He noted the two witnesses, Silas Croft and Pete. "It's a forgery," Clara said, her voice hollow. "I know it is, but how can I prove it?" Jack folded the paper and handed it back to her. "You can't." "What?" "You can't prove it," he said, his voice flat. "Not here, not when the men who witnessed it work for Lawton, and the judge who filed it is on his payroll." He looked toward the town. His eyes narrowed to slits. "This isn't law, Clara. This is theft with a stamp on it." "So what do we do?" she cried, the helplessness rising in her throat. "We just leave? Let him win?" Jack looked at her, at the despair warring with the fury in her eyes. "You're not going to do anything," he said. "I'm going to ride into town. I'm going to ask some questions." "Jack, no. They'll kill you. Silas, that lawyer." "They won't kill me in broad daylight," he said. "Not yet. I just need to see how deep the rot goes." He turned and walked toward his horse without another word. Clara watched him ride away, a knot of pure dread tightening in her stomach. Jack did not go to the sheriff's office. He did not go to the magistrate. He went to the Lawton saloon. It was just past noon, and the place was quiet, smelling of stale beer and sawdust. A few listless card players were in the back. Silas Croft was at the bar, a glass of whiskey in his hand, laughing with the bartender. Jack walked in, his spurs quiet on the floorboards. The laughter stopped. Silas turned, his smile freezing when he saw who it was. "Well, look at this. The stray dog decided to come to his master." "I'm not looking for you," Jack said, his voice carrying easily in the silence. He walked to the bar, standing a few feet from Silas. "Whiskey." The bartender looked at Silas, who gave a small, arrogant nod. The bartender poured. Jack put a coin on the bar. "So, you're still working for the crazy widow?" Silas sneered. "I heard about the fire. Shame. She should have taken the money." Jack picked up the glass but didn't drink. He just looked at Silas's reflection in the mirror behind the bar. "You're one of the witnesses." Silas stiffened. "Witness to what?" "The bill of sale. You and Pete. You watched Ephraim Bellamy sign it." Silas's smirk returned. "That's right. Saw it with my own 2 eyes. The old man was smart. Took the 500 and drank himself into a ravine. Saved Lawton the trouble of kicking him out." "That's not what happened," Jack said, his voice still level, almost conversational. "Oh, yeah? And who are you?" "Stranger. To say what happened. You weren't here." "I know a forgery when I see one," Jack said. "And I know a man who just signed his own death warrant." Silas's hand dropped to his gun. "That sounds like a threat." "It's a fact," Jack said, turning to face him. His coat was open. His hand was nowhere near his pistol. "You and Lawton think you've won. You think a piece of paper makes it true. But it doesn't." "The judge says it's true," Silas said, his voice rising. "The sheriff says it's true. That makes it true." "You paid them," Jack said. How much does a judge like Elias Thorne cost? $100? $2? You've got a big mouth. Drifter. Silas was standing tall now, his hand resting on the butt of his gun. The card players were slowly backing away. And you've got a weak spine, Jack replied, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous hum. You're a dog on a leash, Silas. You burn barns and poison wells and beat up women. But you're smart enough to know that a forged document is only good as long as the men who signed it are alive to swear to it. He leaned in, his voice for Silas's ears alone. Here's what I see. Lawton has his paper. It's filed. It's legal. He doesn't need you anymore. Or Pete. You're loose ends. A witness who could be forced to talk, or paid to talk by someone else. You're a liability. The color drained from Silas's face. The arrogance was replaced by a flicker of sudden, cold fear. He had never thought of that. Lawton wouldn't he? Jack said. He killed Ephraim Bellamy. You think you're better than him? You think he'll spare the hired help? Jack pushed his full glass of whiskey towards Silas. Drink up. You look like you need it. He turned his back on the man and walked out of the saloon. He had his answer. The entire system was rigged, but he had just planted a seed of doubt. A small, black seed of paranoia in the heart of his enemy. He returned to the ranch as the sun was touching the horizon, casting long, bloody shadows across the plains. He found Clara in the kitchen, staring at the cold stove. The forged papers were on the table. It's just like I said, he told her, standing in the doorway. The judge is bought. The sheriff is bought. The witnesses are Lawton's men. There's no law for you here. Clara. She bowed her head. The finality of his words was like a physical blow. It was over. She had lost. So, what do we do? She whispered. Ron? Jack was silent. He looked at her slumped shoulders, at the defeat that had finally, after all these months, settled on her. We eat first, he said quietly. We're no good to anyone if we're starving. It was a strange, subdued meal. They sat at the small kitchen table. Jack had opened a can of peaches he'd bought in town, a luxury. Clara had made biscuits and beans. The food was tasteless, but they ate. The simple, mechanical act of survival. The confession from the night of the nightmare felt incomplete. That had been a summary of her grief, spoken into the darkness. This was different. This was a final accounting, a confession spoken in the face of absolute defeat. I told you about my husband. Andrew, she said, her voice soft, pushing beans around her plate. I didn't tell you the truth, not all of it. Jack stopped eating. He just listened. He didn't just drink himself to death. He did it on purpose. We lost our daughter, Anna. She was perfect, but she was born too early. She only lived for 2 days. I held her the whole time. When she was gone, I think I went away, too. I wouldn't speak. I wouldn't eat. I just sat in her empty room, holding the blanket. She looked up, her eyes dry and burning. Andrew, he couldn't reach me. He begged me. He cried. He said we could have another, but I couldn't see him. I was so full of my own grief. I didn't see his. He started drinking heavily. One night, he came into the nursery. He was drunk. He said it was my fault, that I was cold, that I had let her die because I wasn't strong enough. He didn't mean it, Jack said, his voice a low rumble. He did, in that moment, Clara said. And the worst part is, I thought he was right. I still do. A week later, he walked into the barn. The same barn Lawton's men burned. And he shot himself. She finally let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 2 years. I found him. So when I say I'm afraid, when I pulled away from you, it's not you I'm afraid of, Jack. It's that needing someone and finding out that love is just a different way to be destroyed. First Andrew, then my father, everyone I lean on. They fall, or they're taken. Jack sat in the lamplight, his face carved in shadow. He didn't offer her pity. He didn't tell her she was wrong. He didn't give her empty platitudes. He just sat there and held her gaze, his own haunted eyes acknowledging her pain, accepting it as a truth. He gave her the one thing no one else had, the dignity of her grief, without judgment. "Your husband was a weak man," Jack said finally, his voice quiet but hard. "He was broken by a grief that should have made him stronger, for you. Your father was a strong man, and he was murdered for it. Neither of them was your fault." He reached across the table, his hand calloused and scarred, and for the first time, he laid his hand over hers. His touch was firm, grounding. "You're still here, Clara. You're not cold. You're not weak. You're the strongest person I've ever known. You've just been alone for too long." She stared at their hands, his brown, scarred skin covering her own, and a single, hot tear escaped and splashed onto the table. That night, the storm broke. It had been threatening for days, the air thick and yellow. It came with a vengeance. The wind hit the small house like a physical blow, shrieking and howling. Rain came not in drops, but in horizontal sheets that hammered against the windows. Clara woke from a fitful sleep to the sound of the new corral fence splintering. "The horses!" "Jack!" she yelled, stumbling from her cot. He was already at the door, pulling on his boots. "Stay inside. The horses aren't worth your life." "I'm not losing them, too," she cried, pulling on her own boots and her father's slicker. She was out the door before he could stop her, running into a wall of wind and water. It was black as pitch, the world illuminated only by blinding white flashes of lightning. "Clara, get back here," he roared, but his voice was stolen by the wind. She reached the new corral. A section of the fence was down, and the horses were gone, panicked by the thunder. "Samson!" she screamed into the storm. She saw them, a flash of white lightning reflecting off their wet hides, huddled near the dry creek bed. She ran toward them, slipping and sliding in the thick mud. The ground, already parched, could not absorb the deluge. The dry wash was beginning to run. She grabbed Samson's mane, trying to lead him to the relative safety of the house, but a crack of lightning, so close it smelled of sulfur, struck a nearby cottonwood. The tree exploded. The horses bolted, scattering in the darkness. Clara was thrown backward, landing hard in the mud. She tried to stand, but her foot slipped. She fell, her head striking a rock hidden by the rising water. The world went gray and silent, the roar of the storm fading to a dull buzz. Jack found her 10 minutes later. He had been using the lightning flashes to search, his heart a cold knot of dread. He saw her, a pale shape crumpled at the edge of the creek, which was now a churning, muddy river. She was unconscious, half submerged in the cold water. "Clara!" He scooped her up as if she weighed nothing. Her head lolled back. She was cold, too cold. He carried her, his long strides sure even in the sucking mud, back to the house. He kicked the door open and laid her on the floor in front of the hearth. She was shivering, a violent, bone-rattling tremor that shook her whole body. Her lips were blue. "No," he growled, his voice raw. "You're not dying, not you." He worked with the same speed and precision he had used by the well. He built the fire up from embers to a roaring blaze. He ripped the wet, muddy clothes from her body, his movements rough but efficient. He grabbed the quilt from her cot and began to rub her limbs, trying to force warmth back into them. But she was still so cold. Hypothermia. He had seen it kill men in the war. Her breathing was shallow, her shivers weakening. A dangerous sign. He made a decision. He stripped off his own wet shirt and boots. He lifted her, wrapped the quilt around both of them, and sat on the floor, pulling her against his bare chest, his back to the fire. He began to rub her back, her arms, her legs. His own body heat a desperate offering against the deadly cold. "Come on, Clara," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Fight. You don't get to quit now. Fight," she moaned, her eyes flickering open. She was disoriented, her gaze unfocused. She felt the rough quilt, the heat of the fire, and the hard, warm body against her. She realized she was naked. "No," she stammered, her teeth chattering. She tried to push away, a feeble, reflexive movement of shame. "My body. Don't look. She was ashamed of the small, pale scars from her childhood, of the thinness of her frame, of the vulnerability. Her body was a map of her grief, and she couldn't bear for him to see it. Jack stopped her, his grip gentle but firm. He held her still. He looked down at her, his face illuminated by the firelight, and the coldness, the violence she had seen in him, was gone. All that was left was a raw, aching tenderness. He touched her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "Clara," he said, his voice a low rumble, thick with an emotion she couldn't name. "There's nothing here that needs hiding." He didn't just look at her, he saw her. He saw the scars, the sorrow, and the strength, and his gaze held no judgment. It held only reverence. The storm raged outside, but in the small cabin, there was only the sound of the fire and their breathing. The cold was receding, replaced by a different kind of heat. The shivering that racked her body was no longer just from the ice in her veins. It was from the touch of his hand. He lowered his head. He kissed her. Not the desperate, hungry kiss from the barn. This was slow. It was deep. It was a question and a promise. It was a kiss that said, "I see all of you, and I am not afraid." She responded, her fear melting in the heat of his touch. This was not the trap she had feared. This was a sanctuary. This was two wounded, broken people finding a piece of themselves in each other. He laid her down on the quilt, his body shielding hers from the cold room. Their lovemaking was not a rush of passion, but a slow, emotional, almost painful exploration. It was fierce with all the suppressed hunger, all the lonely nights, all the desperate, unspoken need. It was a quiet, desperate collision of two souls who needed to be held, not fixed. The next morning, Clara woke to the smell of coffee. Sunlight, clean and sharp after the storm, streamed through the window. She was in her own cot, tucked under the quilt. She was wearing one of Jack's shirts, the cotton soft and smelling of him. She sat up, her head aching. The memories of the night, the storm, the fire, his hands, his body, rushed back. He was sitting at the table, his back to her, mending the bridle she had abandoned. He had already been out. The corral was patched, and the horses were inside, grazing on a pile of hay he must have salvaged. He heard her move and turned. Their eyes met. Clara's face flushed. She pulled the quilt tighter, suddenly awkward, unsure what the daylight would bring. "Jack, about last night." He didn't let her finish. He didn't let her apologize or diminish it. He stood up, walked to the cot, and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. His grip was solid. He looked down at her, his winter sky eyes clear and steady. "I'm not sorry. Clara." A week passed. The 48-hour deadline came and went. The sheriff never appeared. Harlan Pike did not return. Jack's words in the saloon had worked. He had thrown a rock into Lawton's machine, and now the gears were grinding, the paranoia spreading. Silas Croft, now fearing for his own life, was likely in hiding, no longer so eager to do Lawton's bidding. They had bought themselves time. A new normal settled over the ranch. It was no longer Clara's ranch or Jack's duty. It was theirs. They worked together, rebuilding. He no longer slept in the line shack. He slept on the floor by the fire, a self-imposed boundary that was both respectful and, in its own way, more intimate than if he had shared her cot. The night by the fire had changed everything. The walls between them were gone. They talked. They laughed. She watched him carve a small wooden horse for the neighbor's child, his scarred hands moving with surprising delicacy. He watched her temper return, her resilience no longer brittle, but flexible and strong. On Sunday, Clara did something she hadn't done in months. She hitched the buckboard. "I'm going to church," she announced. Jack looked up from the harness he was oiling. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "I'm not going to hide," she said. Her chin set. "This is my home. This is my town. I'm not going to let them shame me out of it." "Then I'm coming with you," he said. The small white church was full. When Clara Bellamy walked in, A hush fell over the congregation when Jack Morrow, in a clean shirt, his gun belt conspicuously absent, walked in behind her and sat in the pew. The hush turned into a wave of sharp, indrawn breaths and furious whispers. Clara kept her eyes forward, her back straight. She could feel Beth Ann Culpepper's stare burning into her from across the aisle. Reverend Culpepper, a thin, severe man, climbed to the pulpit. He cleared his throat, his gaze landing on Clara and Jack. "This morning," he began, his voice booming with false piety, "our text is from the book of Proverbs. Can a man take fire in his bosom, and his clothes not be burned? So he that goeth into his neighbor's wife, whosoever toucheth her shall not be innocent." Clara flinched as if he had struck her. It was a direct assault. The whispers grew louder. She was being shamed, publicly, from the pulpit. She felt the humiliation rise, hot and acidic. She was a lost cause, a woman of ill repute, the town whore. She started to rise, to flee. A hand, strong and calloused, covered hers, holding her in place. "Jack!" He stood up. The church went utterly silent. Jack Morrow was not a tall man, but he seemed to fill the entire building. He looked at Reverend Culpepper, his gaze flat and cold. "Reverend," he said, his voice not loud, but it cut through the silence like a razor. "You quote scripture, but you seem to have missed the parts about bearing false witness, or the parts about casting the first stone." He turned, his gaze sweeping over the congregation, over Mrs. Davies, over Henry Hatcher, over Beth Ann Culpepper, who looked away. "You all sit here," Jack said, his voice vibrating with a quiet, controlled anger. "You sit in your Sunday best and you judge this woman. Which one of you helped her when her barn was burned? Which one of you offered her a hand when Lawton's men tried to poison her well? Which one of you spoke up when her father was murdered and his land stolen by the man who paid for your church bell?" No one moved. No one spoke. "You talk about decency," Jack said, his voice dropping. "You talk about shame. This woman has more courage and more decency in her little finger than this entire town has in its cowardly heart." He looked at Clara, his expression softening for just a moment. Then he looked back at the preacher. "Mrs. Bellamy is being abandoned by every decent person in this valley. She's being threatened, and she's being robbed. I'm the only one standing with her." He stepped out of the pew, into the aisle. He stood beside her, a protector, defiant. "If decency means abandoning her to men like Lawton," Jack said, his voice clear and final, "then I'll keep my shame." He held out his hand to Clara. She took it. Her hand was trembling, but her head was high. Together, they turned their backs on the preacher, on the whispers, and on the judgment, and they walked out of the church, into the bright, unforgiving sunlight. Walking out of the church had been a declaration of war. Clara knew it. Jack knew it. The town, silent and staring from the windows of the church, knew it. They had drawn a line, not in the dust, but in the very heart of the community. They were pariahs. They were alone, together. Rex Lawton, it turned out, did not appreciate being defied. His attempt to buy the ranch had failed. His attempt to scare Clara off with arson had failed. His attempt to poison her well had failed. His legal maneuver with the forged deed had been stalled by Jack's quiet threat to Silas Croft, who, as Jack had predicted, had vanished. Now, Lawton returned to the simplest, cruelest tactic of all: attrition. He meant to starve them out. The first blow came not with fire, but with silence. The creak. It was Jack who noticed it. He had been checking the new corral, and he paused, his head tilted. "It's too quiet," he said. "What is?" Clara asked, coming to stand beside him. "The creak. I can't hear it." They walked past the burned-out shell of the barn, through the cottonwoods, to the shallow bed of Stone Creek. It was dry. The mud was already baked and cracking under the high summer sun. A few shallow pools of stagnant water remained, but the steady, life-giving flow that fed the ranch was gone. "He wouldn't," Clara whispered, her voice hollow. "He would," Jack said. They saddled the horses and rode 2 miles upstream, crossing the line onto Lawton's property. They found it easily. A new, crude dam of rock and felled timber blocked the main channel. A deep, new ditch diverted the water, sending it east, toward Lawton's own vast herds. The Bellamy Ranch had been cut off. Clara stared at the stolen water, her face a mask of cold fury. This was more than an attack. It was a sentence of death. Without the creek, the remaining cattle would die. The small vegetable garden she had replanted would wither. They could not survive. They rode back in silence. When they reached the yard, they found the second blow. Lawton's men had been busy while they were gone. They had driven a small herd of cattle back and forth through her garden and the small hayfield she was nursing. The plants were trampled into the mud. Ruined, the earth was torn. It was an act of profound, wasteful spite. Clara slid from her horse, walked to the edge of the ruined garden, and knelt. She picked up a broken tomato plant, its green fruit crushed. She said nothing. She didn't cry. She simply knelt in the mud, her back rigid. Jack dismounted and stood beside her. He looked at the dammed creek, the ruined crops, and the vast, dry prairie around them. Lawton owned the water. He owned the town. He owned the law. He had, in effect, built a wall around them. "He thinks he's won," Clara said, her voice flat, all the emotion pressed out of it. "He thinks we'll dry up and blow away." "He's wrong," Jack said. He found a new focus. The man who had run from his past, who had wanted only peace, was now a man cornered. And a cornered man, he knew, was the most dangerous kind. But his fight was not with his gun. Not yet. It was with his mind. "If we can't have the creek, we'll take the rain," he announced the next morning. He remembered a low-lying basin, a natural dip in the rock shelf 100 yards behind the house, hidden by a stand of juniper. For the next week, they worked with a desperate, furious energy. They used the salvaged barn wood to build a frame. They used picks and shovels to deepen the basin, their hands blistering and breaking. They lined it with rocks, hauling them one by one, their bodies aching. They were building a cistern, a hidden catch system to gather the precious, infrequent rain. It was backbreaking, heartbreaking work, and it was their only secret. The water in the rain barrels was almost gone. The dust was thick, but the lack of water was only half the siege. The other was food. Their supplies were dwindling. The garden was gone. The last of the flour was riddled with weevils. "We have to hunt," Jack said, his voice grim. They rode out at dawn, not with the purpose of mending fences, but with the grim necessity of filling their bellies. They rode deep into the hills, far from the ranch, where the land was still wild. They found tracks by a small spring that Lawton hadn't yet found. A buck, a big one. Jack tracked it for an hour, moving with a silence that still astonished Clara. He was part of the landscape, his movements fluid and sure. He held up a hand. The buck was 50 yards ahead, drinking from the spring. "You take the shot," he whispered, handing her the rifle. "Me? I need to know you can," he said. "No shaking. Breathe out. Squeeze." Clara took the rifle. This was not a tin can. This was life. She rested the barrel on the branch of a piñón pine. She found the buck in her sights. She let out her breath, just as he'd taught her. She thought of the creek. She thought of the garden. She squeezed the trigger. The shot was clean. The buck dropped. The silence that followed was heavy. They butchered the deer together. A grim, necessary, and profoundly intimate act. They were slick with blood, their hands working in tandem, separating hide from meat, wrapping the precious food in the canvas they had brought. They were no longer a widow and a drifter. They were a team, bound by survival. That night, the smell of venison roasting over the fire filled the small cabin. They were exhausted, sore, but they were not beaten. The pretense of Jack sleeping on the floor had ended after the church. It had seemed a childish, pointless gesture in the face of their open defiance. He had moved his bedroll to the cot, and she had moved over. They slept beside each other every night, their bodies pressed together. It was a comfort that went deeper than passion. It was the solid, breathing proof that they were not alone. It was his hand finding hers in the dark. It was the steady rise and fall of his chest against her back. They lay in the dark, the fire dying to embers, the smell of the meat rich in the air. "I keep thinking," Jack said, his voice a low rumble in the darkness, "about what I'll do when this is over, if it ever is." Clara turned to face him, her head pillowed on his arm. "What do you think of?" He was silent for a long time. "Peace, just peace. I want to go somewhere. Oregon. Maybe somewhere green. Somewhere it rains so much you forget what dust tastes like. I want to build a house, not a cistern. I want to own a hammer and not know where my gun is. I want to forget the smell of powder, the things I did in Kansas. The sound that man made when I hit him by the well. I want to be a different man." His left hand, the one that trembled, was resting on her waist. She covered it with her own. "That's a good dream." "Jack, what about you?" he asked, his voice soft. "What's your dream, Clara? Besides this ranch," Clara thought. The ranch was everything. It was her father, her past, but a future. "I want what you want. Peace. I want to hear the creek running again. I want to stand on the porch and not be afraid of who's riding in. I want—" She hesitated. It was a secret she hadn't even admitted to herself, a grief so deep it was almost hope. "I want children," she whispered, the words so quiet they were almost stolen by the night. "This house is so empty. It's been empty for so long. I want to hear it. I want to hear it full again. I want a home. Not just a piece of land to fight for. A home." He pulled her closer, his embrace tightening. He kissed the top of her head. He understood. They were fighting for the same thing. A place to be, a place to heal. The next day, he took her out to the rocks behind the house, to the place where the cistern was slowly taking shape. He unholstered his pistol. "The rifle is for hunting," he said, his voice all business. "This is for fighting. Lawton isn't going to stay quiet forever. He knows his siege is failing." He handed her the Colt. It was heavy, a solid, deadly weight. It was the same gun she had threatened Silas with, but it felt different now. "I know how to shoot," she said, her voice defensive. "You know how to point and pull a trigger," he corrected her. "You don't know how to fight. Your hand is shaking. It's heavy. You'll get used to it." He taught her. He didn't just tell her. He showed her. How to stand. How to draw the weapon so it didn't snag. How to breathe. How to use the sight. "It's not like the rifle," he said, his voice patient. "You don't have time to aim. You point. You find the center of the man, and you squeeze. You don't pull, you squeeze." He set up 3 tin cans on a rock, 20 paces away. "Go on." She raised the gun, her arm aching. She fired. The explosion was deafening, the kick much harder than she'd expected. The shot went wide, kicking up dust 5 feet to the left. Again, she fired. Missed. Again. She fired again. Missing. Frustration and fear made her hands tremble. "I can't. It's too heavy. I can't hit anything." "You're afraid of it," Jack said. He stepped behind her. Clara stiffened. His body was pressed against her back. He put his right arm over hers, his hand covering her hand on the grip. His left hand settled on her waist, steadying her. She could feel his breath on her ear. "Stop fighting it," he whispered. "Feel the weight. Let it become part of your arm. Now, breathe out. Find the center of the can. Squeeze. With me." His fingers squeezed hers. The gun fired. The middle can jumped into the air. "See?" he murmured. "Again. You. This time." He stepped back. Clara raised the gun. She breathed. She squeezed. The second can flew off the rock. A strange, cold feeling filled her. She turned, aimed, and fired at the third can. It vanished. She stood there, the pistol smoking in her hand, the smell of sulfur in her nose. She had done it. She had hit all 3. She was a woman who could kill. And suddenly, it was too much. The siege, the hunt, The gun, the memory of her father's body, the memory of her husband's, the fear she had lived with for so long, a cold snake in her belly. Uncoiled, she dropped the pistol as if it were on fire. The strength drained from her legs. She turned and buried her face in Jack's chest, her body racked with dry, choking sobs. "I'm so tired," she wept, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I'm so tired. Jack, I'm so tired of being afraid. I'm tired of fighting, and I'm tired of being strong. I just want it to be over." He didn't speak. He just held her. He wrapped his arms around her and let her cry. He let her shake. He held her upright until the storm of her grief had passed. When she finally grew quiet, her sobs fading to exhaustion, he tilted her chin up. Her face was streaked with tears and dust. He looked at her, his eyes full of a tenderness that made her heart ache. "I know," he said, his voice rough. "I know." He gently kissed her forehead. Then, slowly, he kissed the tears from her cheeks. One, then the other. He kissed the salt from her lips. It was not a kiss of passion or of hunger. It was a kiss of comfort. It was a kiss that said, "You are not alone. Let me carry this for a while." They needed supplies, salt, coffee, cartridges. The essentials they could not make or hunt. The general store in town was a hostile place, and Hatcher had no credit for them anyway. "I'll ride to Clearwater," Jack said. "It's a 40-mile ride. I can be there by noon, back by sundown tomorrow." "No," Clara said, a spike of cold fear in her. "It's too dangerous. Lawton's men are here," he said. "Or in town. They won't be looking for me in another county. We're out of salt. The meat will spoil. We're down to a dozen cartridges for the rifle. We have no choice." He insisted on going alone. He wouldn't risk her on the road. He left before dawn. Clara stood on the porch and watched him ride out, a single, dark figure against the graying sky. The silence he left behind was terrifying. The ranch felt empty again. The house too quiet. He was due back the next evening. Sundown came, painting the sky in shades of orange and blood. He didn't come. Dusk settled. Clara paced the porch, the shotgun in her hands. Every shadow was a threat. Every night bird's call was a warning. Then the rain started, a cold, miserable drizzle that turned the yard to mud. It was midnight. She was at the window, her eyes burning from staring into the darkness, when she heard it. A horse, stumbling, whinnying, low and in pain. She grabbed the lantern, her heart in her throat, and ran out into the rain. Jack's horse was standing by the corral, its reins broken, its flank bleeding. But Jack was not on it. "Jack!" she screamed into the wind. A low moan answered her. From the darkness near the road, she ran, the lantern light sliding over the mud. She found him. He wasn't riding. He was crawling. He had fallen from the horse, and he had been crawling, dragging himself through the mud for what looked like a mile. He was a nightmare of blood and black mud. His face was swollen beyond recognition. One eye a purple slit. His shirt was torn. "Clara!" he wheezed, and collapsed. She hauled him up, her own strength a mystery. He was a dead weight, barely conscious. She dragged him, step by agonizing step, back to the house, his boots leaving 2 trails in the mud. She got him inside, kicked the door shut against the rain, and got him onto the cot. In the flickering lantern light, she saw the true extent of the damage. He had been beaten, methodically, brutally. His ribs were clearly broken. His face was a ruin. She grabbed her shears to cut away his wet, bloody shirt. "Who did this, Jack?" New men," he whispered. His teeth chattered. "Ambush on the ridge." She cut the shirt open, and she saw it. She made a sound, a low, guttural noise that was not a word. The supplies were gone. His gun was gone. But they had left him a message, carved into the skin of his chest with a knife. 2 words, ragged and bloody. "Last warning." Clara stared at the words, her vision narrowing. The sound of the rain and her own blood roaring in her ears. The fear she had felt, the exhaustion, the tears, all of it vanished. It was burned away in a single, clarifying flash of pure, white-hot rage. She turned. Her hands were shaking, violently. She walked to the cupboard, her movements jerky. She took down her sewing basket. She took down the bottle of whiskey. He was shivering, drifting into shock. She poured a rag full of whiskey and, without a word, pressed it to the raw, carved letters. Jack screamed, a choked, terrible sound, and arched off the cot before collapsing again. "Hold still," Clara ordered, her voice a terrifying calm. She threaded the needle. Her hands would not stop shaking. She had to clench them into fists, dig her nails into her palms until she drew blood, and then thread the needle again. She sat on the edge of the cot. He was watching her through his one good eye, his breath coming in shallow, painful gasps. "Clara, Shut up," she whispered. Her voice was shaking, but the words were hard as iron. "Don't speak. You're just going to save your breath." She touched the needle to his skin. He flinched. She didn't. She began to stitch. The tears streamed down her face, but she made no sound. She worked in the lamplight, her hands covered in his blood, her movements becoming precise, automatic. She stitched the ragged edges of his skin back together, closing the wounds, closing the horrible, carved words. "You're not dying," she whispered to the needle, to the thread, to him. "Do you hear me? You're not dying, not you." He passed out before she was halfway done. She finished the last stitch as the first gray light of dawn touched the window. Her hands were cramped. Her back was on fire. He was alive. His breathing was shallow. His body radiating a dangerous heat, fever. She covered him with every blanket she owned. She sat in the chair across from the cot. She picked up her father's shotgun and laid it across her lap. She sat vigil. She watched the rise and fall of his chest. She listened to the rain fade. She was no longer crying. Her eyes were dry. She thought of Andrew, who had given up. She thought of her father, who had been struck down. Lawton had taken them both from her, in their own ways. Now he had tried to take this man. She looked at Jack, at his ruined face, at the neat, black stitches she had sewn across his chest. She thought of the words that lay hidden beneath them. "I won't lose this one," she thought, her grip tightening on the shotgun. Not again. The sun came up. The fever had not broken. He was muttering, lost in a dark, violent dream. Clara stood and walked to the window. She looked out at the ranch, her ranch, but it was more than that now. It was a prison, and it was a fortress. Her decision was made. The fear was gone. The exhaustion was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard certainty of what she had to do. She was done defending. She was done surviving. She was done being afraid. She was going to fight back. And she was not just going to save the ranch. She was going to destroy Rex Lawton and his entire rotten empire. It took 4 days for the fever to break. 4 days of Clara sitting vigil, bathing his face, forcing broth and water down his throat, and watching, always watching. She lived in a state of suspended, cold rage. The woman who had wept with fear was gone, replaced by someone she barely recognized, a person forged in the fire of Jack's torture. On the 5th morning, Jack opened his good eye and the haze was gone. He was weak, his voice a dry rasp, but his mind was clear. "Clara," he breathed. "I'm here," she said, her voice flat. She was cleaning her shotgun, the pieces laid out on the table. He tried to sit up, and a sharp, agonizing pain shot through his ribs and chest. He fell back, gasping. "The stitches! I did them," she said, not looking up. "They'll hold. You have 2 broken ribs, maybe 3. You're lucky he didn't puncture a lung." He looked at her, at the shotgun, at the cold, hard set of her jaw. "Clara, what are you doing?" "Getting ready," she said, snapping the gun back together with a precise, final click. "Ready for what? To die?" he rasped, angry. "They beat me. Clara, they'll kill us. We have to run, as soon as I can ride." "No?" She stood up and faced him. The sunlight from the window framed her, but she was all shadow. "We're not running. You told me there was no law for me here. You were wrong. There's just no law for me in this county. He stared at her, confused. What are you talking about? I'm talking about Clearwater, she said, her voice sharp. You rode there for supplies. It's in Carbon County. This is Albany County. They have their own sheriff, their own magistrate. Clara, it's the same system everywhere. No, she insisted. Judge Elias Thorne is Lawton's man, but the circuit judge, the one who travels, he's not Judge Abram Hale. My father spoke of him. He's a federal man. He's hard, but he's honest. He's due in Clearwater to hear cases tomorrow. Jack stared at her, seeing the new, dangerous resolve in her. And what do you plan to do? Ride 40 miles, half dead, to talk to a judge who won't listen? No, she said. You're not going. We are. You can't stay here alone. You'll die, and I'm not leaving you. And I'm not going to him as a victim. I'm going to him as a citizen. My father. He kept everything, every receipt, every land patent. He kept them in a lockbox under the floorboards in his room. I'm going to find the real deed. It took him 2 more days to be able to sit a horse. He was a wreck, his body wrapped tight with torn sheets, his face a mask of purple and black. Clara packed a satchel with the old metal lockbox, a jug of water, and the last of the deer meat. She left the ranch at 2 in the morning, the moon a sliver overhead. They rode south first, into the dry hills, avoiding the main road, their path a long, painful circle toward Clearwater. Every step the horse took was an agony for Jack, but he rode without complaint, his hand resting on the new pistol he'd taken from Clara's meager arsenal, a gun he'd insisted she buy months ago. They arrived in Clearwater looking like ghosts. It was a bigger, busier town, a railroad stop with a sense of its own importance. They didn't go to the hotel. They went to the county courthouse, a small but imposing brick building. Judge Abram Hale was a man who looked like he'd been carved from a sour apple. He was old, with a fringe of white hair and eyes that had seen every kind of human failing. He listened, his fingers steepled. As Clara laid out her story, she was articulate, her voice low and steady. Her rage banked into a cold, clear fire. She spoke of the threats, the arson, the poisoning, the forged deed. She finished with the ambush, and Jack's silence, his battered face, was the final, damning piece of evidence. When she was done, the judge was silent. He looked at the forged paper she'd brought. Mr. Pike is a clever lawyer, and Rex Lawton is a powerful man. He practically built Albany County. He built it on theft. Clara said. Perhaps, the judge said. But you have no proof, only a story, a compelling one. But your father's signature is a forgery, Clara insisted. She opened the lockbox. My father's land patent, signed in 1872, and his last will and testament, leaving the ranch and all its holdings to me, his only child, Clara Jane Bellamy, signed 6 months ago. The signatures, you'll see they're the same, but they are not the same as the one on that bill of sale. Judge Hale studied the documents. He stroked his chin. This is compelling, but it's not proof of forgery. It's one man's word against another's. And your father is dead. Lawton's witnesses will swear they saw him sign. Silas Croft has disappeared, Jack said, his voice a low rasp. And the other one, Pete, he'll do whatever Lawton says. Then we are at an impasse, the judge said, his voice holding a note of genuine regret. No, sir, a new voice said. A young man, no older than 20, stepped out from a back office. He was thin, with spectacles and a nervous twitch in his hands. He was clutching a large ledger book to his chest like a shield. Excuse me, Your Honor. What is it? Mr. Evans, the judge said, annoyed. It's just, I'm the clerk. I file the deeds. Sir, from both counties. When they're federal patents. And I remember this one. He looked at Clara, his face pale. I remember when Mr. Lawton's lawyer, Mr. Pike, came in 3 months ago, just after Mr. Bellamy's death, not before. What are you saying, son? Judge Hale said, leaning forward. He brought the deed, the bill of sale. He said it had been misplaced. He wanted me to file it. He He gave me $100, sir, to backdate the entry, to match the date on the document." The young man was shaking, but he held his ground. I needed the money. My mother, she's been sick, but I knew it was wrong." He opened the ledger. I did what he asked. I entered it under the old date, but I'm not a fool. I made a copy of the original county land grant, the one from the federal office, before Lawton started expanding. He fumbled in the book and pulled out a single, crisp sheet of paper. "This is the official county plat map and the corresponding grant record, registered in 1872, the Bellamy Ranch. It's in your name. Ma'am, it has been since your father passed. The will was filed right here, in this office, not in Albany. Your father, he must have known. He must not have trusted Judge Thorne." Clara took the paper. The real deed. Her name. It was all there. This is it," she whispered, her hands shaking. "This changes things," Judge Hale said, his voice grim. He stood up. "Mr. Evans, you are a brave man. You are also a fool, but a brave one." He looked at Clara and Jack. "You have your proof, but you must understand what this means. This isn't just about your ranch. This deed, this testimony from Mr. Evans, this calls into question every land deal Lawton has made in the last 10 years. His entire empire. It's built on illegal claims, forged papers, and intimidation. You don't just have a case. You have the end of his world in your hands." "Good," Clara said. "You don't understand. Child," the judge said, his voice hard. "Men like Rex Lawton do not go to court. They do not bow to the law. When they are cornered, they do not send lawyers. They send killers. He will not let you live to use this. He will not let Mr. Evans live. He will not let me live, if he knows I'm involved." "So what do we do?" Jack asked, his hand resting on his gun. "You," the judge said, "are going to get on your horses and disappear. Give me the deed. Give me Mr. Evans. I will contact the federal marshal's office in Cheyenne. I will have them meet me here. We will build the case, but it will take time. Weeks, maybe a month. You will not survive that long on that ranch. He will find out I've been here. He will know something is wrong. He will move against you, and he will move with everything he has." "Run," Jack said, looking at Clara. "He's telling us to run." "I'm telling you to live," Judge Hale corrected. "Go, now, and pray he doesn't find you before the marshal finds him." The ride back was silent. The real deed, a burning weight in Clara's satchel. They didn't go back to the ranch. They made a cold camp in the hills, 5 miles away, a place where they could see the small house, a dark smudge in the valley below. Jack was building a small, smokeless fire, his movement slow and painful. His ribs were on fire. He looked at Clara. She was staring at the ranch. "He's right," Jack said, his voice a low rasp. Clara didn't turn. "About what?" "About running. We have the deed. We have the clerk. The judge will handle it. Our part is done. We have to live. He'll destroy it," she whispered. "If we leave, he'll burn it. He'll burn the house, the graves, everything. There will be nothing to come back to. It's just wood. Clara, it's just dirt. We can build another house. We can't come back from a bullet." He stood up, his body protesting, and walked to her. He put his hands on her shoulders, his grip tight. "Clara, look at me!" She turned, her eyes full of a terrible conflict. "Listen to me," he said, his voice desperate. "My dream, Oregon, the rain, the house with no gun. That wasn't just my dream. That was ours. You, me, a home, peace. We can have that, right now. We can ride east instead of south. We can sell the deed in Cheyenne for money, or just let the judge handle it. We can be gone. We can be safe. We can be alive. Together." He saw her waver. The exhaustion, the fear, the vision of a life free from this. It was all there in her eyes. She wanted to. God, she wanted to. "I love you," he whispered, the words raw, forced out of him by the fear of losing her. "I love you, and I can't. I won't watch him kill you. Please, let's go. She leaned into him, her forehead resting on his chest, on the stitches she had sewn. She could feel the ragged, painful beat of his heart. She almost said yes. She almost let the fight drain out of her. Let him take her away from all this. Then she looked past him, down into the valley. She saw the ranch. It wasn't just wood and dirt. It was her father's sweat. It was her mother's garden. It was the memory of a baby she had held for 2 days. She saw the ridge, where the 3 wooden crosses stood. Her family. This land, she said, her voice thick, is part of me. That's my name on the deed. Jack Bellamy. It was my father's, and it's mine. If I run now, I'm not just losing a ranch. I'm losing me. I'm letting him win. I'm letting him take my name, my past, my father's, everything. She pulled back, her eyes clearing, the conflict gone, replaced by the same cold, hard certainty he'd seen when she held the shotgun. I'm not running, she said. He wants this ranch. He'll have to take it. The judge said we have to survive. We're not going to survive by running. We're going to survive by fighting. Jack stared at her. The stubbornness, the sheer, impossible strength of her. He had wanted to save her, to pull her out of the fire, but she wasn't running. She was walking straight into it, and he knew, with a certainty that settled in his bones, that he could not leave her. He could not go to Oregon alone. His dream wasn't a place. It was her. All right, he said, his voice heavy. All right, we fight, but we don't just fight. We win. They didn't return to the ranch immediately. They waited. They watched. For 2 days. They lived in the hills. Jack's body slowly mending, their anger and resolve hardening. They watched the ranch. No one came. Lawton was waiting. He was letting his last warning sink in. He's arrogant, Jack said, his voice stronger. He thinks he's broken us. He thinks we're either dead or gone. Good, Clara said. Let him think it. They warned the few neighbors who weren't allied with Lawton. An old, childless couple named McPhee, who lived 5 miles south. They told them what was coming. They told them to stay inside, to be ready. The old man just nodded, his eyes grim, and handed Jack 2 boxes of cartridges. You give him hell, son. They returned to the ranch under the cover of the night. It felt different. It was no longer a home. It was a battlefield. They spent 1 full day preparing for war. They weren't just defending, they were setting a trap. He'll come from the front, Jack said. He's an arrogant man. He'll want to ride in and watch us beg. He'll be disappointed, Clara said. They reinforced the front door with the heavy kitchen table. They boarded up the side windows, leaving only small slits to shoot from. They moved all the ammunition, the water, and the food into the main room. They stashed rifles at both windows. They took the horses, not to the corral, but into the hidden basin behind the house, safe from the initial volley. The house was a fortress, a small, wooden, desperate fortress. Lawton came on the 3rd day. Just after dawn, the light was gray and flat. Clara saw them first, a cloud of dust on the horizon. Jack, they're coming. He joined her at the window slit, his rifle in his hand. His ribs ached. His face was still a ruin, but his eyes were clear. How many? 7, Clara said, her voice tight. No, 6 riders, and 1 man in a buggy. Pike, Jack growled. The lawyer. He's coming to watch the eviction. The riders fanned out, forming a semicircle in the yard, just out of easy pistol range. They were new men, the ones who had beaten Jack. Hard faces, hired guns. The buggy rolled to a stop. Rex Lawton himself stepped out. He was a big man, in a fine coat, his silver hair shining in the morning light. He looked at the quiet, shuttered house with a look of amusement. Bellamy, he bellowed, his voice carrying easily. Morrow, I know you're in there. Your time is up. My patience is gone. Come out now, and I'll let you walk away. Defy me, and I will burn this house to the ground with you inside it. The front door remained closed. I'm a reasonable man, Lawton shouted. I have a legal deed. The sheriff will be here in an hour to post the notice. This is your last chance." The front door opened, not with a rush of surrender, but slowly, with a defiant creak. Jack Morrow stepped onto the porch. He was not holding a white flag. He was holding a repeating rifle, its muzzle pointed at the ground, but his finger on the trigger. His battered face was a terrifying mask. "Morning, Lawton," Jack called out, his voice strong and clear. Lawton's smile faltered. He had not expected this. He had expected a cowering drifter, or a dead one. "Morrow, so you're still alive? You're a fool. You should have kept crawling. I'm giving you one last chance to save that woman's life. Get on your horse and ride." "The lady's not for sale," Jack said. "And neither is the ranch. You've got no claim here." "I have a deed. Signed and sealed," Lawton roared. "You have a forgery." Jack's voice cracked like a whip. "And Judge Thorne is a coward, and your witnesses are liars. And you're a murderer and a thief." Lawton's face went dark. "You're a dead man, Morrow." "Maybe," Jack said. He raised the rifle, pointing it not at Lawton, but at his chest, a gesture of pure, final defiance. "But you'll have to earn it. You want this ranch? You'll take it from my dead hands." "So be it," Lawton sneered. He turned to his men. "Burn it." It was not a shootout. It was a war. Two of the riders dismounted, carrying torches and kerosene. Jack fired. His first shot was not a warning. It took the first man in the throat. He fell, his torch flying. All hell broke loose. The riders opened fire. A volley of lead that slammed into the house, splintering wood, shattering the last of the glass. "Clara, now!" Jack yelled, diving back inside as a bullet creased the doorframe where his head had been. Clara was at the other window. She saw the second man with the torch, scrambling for cover. She lined up her shot. She breathed out. She squeezed. The man dropped the can and clutched his shoulder, screaming, scrambling back to his horse. "Good shot," Jack yelled, reloading. "He's not dead," Clara cried, her voice high with adrenaline. "He's out of the fight. That's what counts." The battle settled into a rhythm. The riders circled, firing, probing for a weakness. Jack and Clara fired back, their shots precise, measured. They were not wasting ammunition. They were making every bullet count. "They're trying to circle to the back." Jack yelled. "The basin! The horses!" "It's just the horses. Clara, stay on the window." A bullet punched through the wall and struck the coffee pot, sending scalding water everywhere. Clara didn't flinch. She just reloaded. She saw one of the riders, the one she had shot, trying to get on his horse. He was exposed. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and fired again. This time, he didn't get up. A scream from the porch. Jack spun. A rider had made a desperate dash, leaping from his horse onto the porch, a stick of dynamite in his hand. He was trying to light the fuse. Jack didn't have time to aim. He fired his pistol from the hip. The shot hit the man in the chest, but it was too late. The man fell, dropping the lit dynamite. "Get down!" Jack roared. He grabbed Clara, pulling her to the floor, covering her body with his own. As the world exploded, the explosion was deafening. It took out the entire front wall of the house. Splinters, dust, and smoke filled the room. Clara was deafened, her ears ringing. She pushed Jack off her. "Are you—" "I'm fine," he gasped. But he wasn't. A long, jagged piece of the porch, a 2x4, had been blown through the wall and had impaled him high in the side, just below his arm, pinning him to the floor. "Jack!" she screamed. The firing outside stopped. "They're coming!" Jack choked, his face white with pain. He tried to pull the wood out, but it wouldn't budge. "Clara, listen to me. Take the pistol. The back. Go to the basin. Get on a horse. Ride. Don't stop." "I am not leaving you," she shrieked, her voice raw. You're not dying with me," he yelled, his voice breaking. He was bleeding, badly. "We're almost out of it, boss," one of the riders yelled from the yard. "They're finished." Clara heard them. Lawton, Pike, the remaining 3 riders. They were dismounting. They were walking toward the ruined house. She looked at Jack, pinned and bleeding. She looked at the pistol in her hand. The rage, the cold, clear rage, came back. "No," she said. "We're not finished." She stood up in the settling dust, a figure of fury. She walked through the gaping hole where the door had been. Lawton, Pike, and the 3 riders were 10 yards away, their guns out, their faces triumphant. Lawton's smile was a predatory sneer. "Well, Mrs. Bellamy, it seems you are homeless." Clara raised the pistol. Her hand was not shaking. "It's over, girl," one of the riders said, raising his own gun. "Drop it." Clara ignored him. Her eyes were locked on Lawton. You murdered my father. You. "I did what was necessary," Lawton said, his voice cold. "This valley was built by strong men, not by old fools or hysterical women. Now, drop the gun." "Clara, no!" Jack was trying to yell from the floor. She fired. She didn't aim at Lawton. She aimed at the rider who had called her a girl. She shot him in the stomach. He looked down, surprised, and fell. The other 2 riders fired. A bullet burned a line across Clara's arm. Another tugged at her sleeve, but she was already moving, diving back into the house, into the smoke. "She's insane!" Pike screamed, cowering behind the buggy. "Kill her!" Lawton roared. "Kill her now!" One of the riders, the last 2, charged the house. He was met by Jack. Jack had wrenched the piece of wood from his side. The sound had been terrible. He was on his knees, his pistol in his left hand, his face a mask of blood and agony. The rider came through the smoke, and Jack fired twice. The man fell forward, dead, into the ruin of the room. The last rider saw it. He saw his friend fall. He saw Jack, bleeding out on his knees. He saw Clara, reloading her pistol in the corner. He threw his gun down. "I'm done," he yelled. I'm done. I'm just riding. I'm out. I ain't paid enough for this." He turned and ran, grabbing his horse and riding away as fast as he could. It was silent. Lawton was standing in the yard, his fine coat spattered with dust. His lawyer was still hiding. All his men were dead, or gone. It was just him. And then Jack was there. He stumbled out of the smoke, his shirt soaked in blood, his left arm clamped to the wound in his side. He was swaying. He looked like death, but he was walking. He walked right up to Lawton. You just don't die," Lawton stammered, his arrogance gone, replaced by a cold, sudden fear. Jack hit him. He hit him with all the pain, all the rage, all the grief of the last 5 years. He hit him for the family in Kansas. He hit him for the beating on the road. He hit him for Clara. Lawton fell. Jack was on him. His left hand, the one that trembled, was now a fist, and it rose and fell. Again, and again, and again. The sound was wet and ugly. He was beating Lawton to death, his voice a low, animal growl. "Jack!" "Stop!" Clara was there, her pistol in her hand. She was bleeding from her arm. "Jack, you're killing him! He deserves it!" Jack roared, his fist raised for another blow. Lawton was unconscious, his face a bloody ruin. "No!" Clara grabbed his arm. Her strength was nothing, but the touch, the word, it stopped him. "Jack, look at me! Look at me! If we kill like him, we're no better. If he dies like this, we're just murderers. We're just him." Jack froze, his fist trembling over Lawton's face. He looked at his own bloody hand. He looked at Clara. He saw the smoke. He saw Kansas. He collapsed, falling off Lawton, his body finally giving out. He lay on the ground, gasping, the rage gone, leaving only the agony. It's over," Clara whispered, falling to her knees beside him, pressing her hands to the wound in his side. Not yet," a voice said. Harlan Pike, the lawyer, was standing by the buggy. He had a small derringer in his hand, and it was pointed at Clara. "It seems," Pike said, his voice shaking, "that I will have to clean up this mess." Clara's gun was on the ground. Jack's was empty. "Hold it, right there, mister." "Pike!" The voice was new. It was loud. It was official. 4 men were riding into the yard. 4 men in clean, dark coats. One, a young, terrified-looking man with spectacles, was holding a ledger. The man in the lead, a tall man with a silver star on his chest, had his rifle aimed at Pike. It was Mr. Evans, and a federal marshal. "Mr. Harlan Pike," the marshal said, his voice booming. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and murder. Mr. Rex Lawton is also under arrest." Pike dropped the derringer as if it were a snake. Clara just stared. She looked at the marshal. She looked at Mr. Evans, who gave her a small, terrified, triumphant nod. She looked at Jack, who was smiling. A bloody, terrible smile. And then, from the town, from the road, people started to arrive. Mr. Hatcher, Beth Ann Culpepper, the old man, McPhee. They had heard the explosion. They had heard the gunfire. They were coming to see the end. They saw the dead riders. They saw the ruined house. They saw Lawton, a bloody, beaten man, being hauled to his feet and put in irons. They saw the marshal's star. And they saw Clara Bellamy, bloody and exhausted, holding Jack Morrow's hand, still standing on her land. The fear that had held the valley for 10 years broke. The silence was over. People started to talk. He took my water," one man said, stepping forward. "He burned my crop," said another. "He threatened my wife," said a third. The townspeople, finally seeing that the giant was falling, were swarming, eager to land their own blows, to tell their own stories. Lawton's empire, built on fear, was collapsing. One whispered confession at a time. Clara didn't listen. She was on her knees, her hands pressed to Jack's side. "Hold on," she whispered, her voice breaking, the tears finally coming. "Hold on, Jack." "Don't you leave me. Don't you dare. Not going anywhere," he rasped, his eyes fluttering. "Told you, I'm not walking away." He closed his eyes, his hand still holding hers. 6 months. It was a time for seasons to turn, for wounds to scar, and for the land to heal. The black, charred bones of the old barn were gone, cleared away by the hands of neighbors. The house, its front wall blown open, was no longer a ruin. It was new. The people of the valley, freed from the choking shadow of Rex Lawton, had come. Not all at once, but slowly, in ones and twos, as if emerging from a long, dark cellar. Mr. Hatcher from the general store had been the first, his wagon loaded with lumber, nails, and 3 sacks of flour, his face a mask of shame and apology. I can't take any money for this. Mrs. Bellamy, ma'am, it's just a debt, long overdue." Old man McPhee and his wife had come, and stayed for a week. The old man showing Jack the art of raising a beam. His wife showing Clara how to replant a garden so it would take root in the scarred earth. Others followed. Men who had once worked for her father quietly returned, hat in hand, asking for work. The town, which had shamed her, now sought to repay her. The ranch was alive again. The sound of hammers had replaced the sound of gunfire. The creek, its illegal dam torn down by the marshal's men, gurgled through the cottonwoods, clear and full. The new grass, watered and stubborn, was pushing up green through the mud. The fences were mended, straight and strong, and Clara Bellamy smiled. It was a strange, new feeling. It was not the tight, bitter smile of survival. It was a free, open expression that reached her eyes, crinkling the corners. She smiled when she saw the new roof on the house, a solid, unyielding line against the sky. She smiled when she drew water from the well, the taste clean and cold, free of poison. She smiled when she watched Jack. He had healed, but he was not the same. The jagged wound in his side, the one she had sewn with her own hands, had scarred badly. It pulled, and it had left him with a permanent, rolling limp. The man who had moved with such lethal, silent grace now walked with the steady, rhythmic gait of a man who knew pain and had made his peace with it. But the haunt was gone from his eyes. The haunted, silent drifter who had wanted only to disappear was gone. In his place was a man who laughed. It was a rusty sound at first, as if from a part of him long unused, but it grew. He laughed when one of the McPhee's grandchildren, a brave little girl of 5, asked him if his face had lost a fight with a badger. He laughed when he hammered his own thumb, a loud, clear curse that made Clara blush and then laugh with him. He was always busy. He was helping the neighbors, mending their fences, advising them on water. He was, in a quiet, unassuming way, becoming the man her father had been, a cornerstone. He was carving new fence posts for the main gate. Clara had found him one afternoon, his knife in his hand, carefully carving her name into the headpost. C. Bellamy. He had looked up, a flush on his face, afraid she would think him foolish. She had just traced the letters with her finger. "You misspelled it," she said softly. He looked confused. "How? It's not Bellamy," she said. "Not anymore. It's Morrow. Or it will be, if you'll have it." The man from Kansas, the killer, the drifter, had simply stared at her, his knife forgotten, his eyes so full of a raw, sudden light that she'd had to look away. He still had the tremor in his left hand. It only came when he was tired, or when he thought of the fight. But he no longer hid it. It was a part of him, just like the scars. Clara felt the change in herself in the quiet of the morning. It was a strange, rolling sickness that had nothing to do with fear. It was a tenderness in her breasts. It was a stopping of the monthly course that had been her companion for as long as she could remember. She had lost a child. The memory of that small, perfect, cold body was a scar on her soul. She had never, not in all her years with Andrew, not in her darkest nights, believed she would ever face that hope, that terror, again. She was pregnant. She found out for certain from Mrs. McPhee, who had looked at her, at the paleness of her face in the morning and the new fullness of her figure, and had simply smiled. The old woman had pressed a small, paper-wrapped bundle into her hands a week later. "Every new life needs a warm start," she'd said, and bustled away. Clara carried the bundle to the cottonwoods, to the ridge where her father and her mother and her tiny, lost Anna were buried. She sat, the new green grass soft under her. She opened the package. Inside was a pair of small, impossibly small, booties, knitted from soft white wool. She held them in her hand. They were so small, so fragile, and they represented a hope so large and so terrifying that it threatened to drown her. She was 27 years old. She had been a widow, a pariah, a fighter, and now she was this. She was afraid. She was afraid to tell Jack. It was not the fear of a woman telling a man she was with child. It was the fear of a person who has finally found a small, perfect, fragile piece of happiness, and who is terrified that by naming it, by holding it to the light, she will shatter it. Their life was so good. It was quiet. It was real. This was a dream, and dreams had a way of breaking. What if the shadow of her first loss, of her husband's weakness, was still on her? She didn't hear him approach. His limp was quiet on the soft earth. He sat down beside her, his solid presence a comfort. He didn't speak for a long time. He just sat with her, looking out at the valley, at their valley. He saw the bundle. He saw the white wool in her hand. She tensed, her breath catching. 1,000 explanations, 1,000 fears rising in her throat. "Jack, He didn't let her speak. He didn't ask. He didn't act surprised. He simply reached out, his hand, the one that no longer trembled, and covered hers, enclosing the small booty in their joined grasp. He looked at it, then at her. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, now warm and clear. He pulled her close, his arm wrapping around her, pulling her head to his chest. He held her, his grip solid, his body a shield. He kissed the top of her head, and she felt the rumble in his chest before she heard the words. His voice thick and raw with an emotion that shattered her fear. "I prayed," he whispered, his voice breaking. I prayed I'd live to see this. That night, they sat on the porch of the new house. It was a solid house, built of new, sweet-smelling pine and salvaged hope. The stars were out, a brilliant, cold spray against the black, endless sky. They sat in 2 rocking chairs her father had built, holding hands in the quiet. The silence was no longer empty. It was full of their shared past, full of the future that was now growing inside her. "It's funny," Clara whispered, her head leaning against his shoulder. "All those months, all that running you were doing in your own head. You came here to disappear." Jack was quiet for a moment. He looked up at the stars, the same stars he had watched for 5 years, looking for an escape, for a place to hide. He was no longer hiding. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "I did," he answered, his voice a low, steady rumble. "I found something to live for instead." 2 days later, they got married. There was no white dress. There was no church, no preacher. They had had enough of the town's judgment. This was not for them. This was for her. This was for him. They walked, hand in hand, to the ridge under the cottonwoods. The sun was setting, painting the hills in shades of gold and deep purple. The graves of her family were there, the simple wooden crosses a testament to the life that had been. They stood before her father's grave. I don't know the words," Clara said, her voice small. "I do," Jack said. He turned to her. He was not the battered man she had found in the mud. He was not the killer by the well. He was just Jack. His face was clean, his hair was combed, and his eyes were fixed on her, full of a love so profound it was a physical thing. He took both of her hands in his. "Clara Jane Bellamy," he said, his voice quiet, but it carried in the still evening air. "You took in a stranger. You healed him. You fought by him. You showed him what courage was. You showed him what a home was." He swallowed, his own emotion thick in his throat. "I've got nothing. No land, no name, no past I'd want to claim. All I have is what's standing right here. I'm not a good man, but I want to be for you." He raised her hand. "I promise, I will never let you fall. I will never let you be alone. I will stand with you against outlaws, or drought, or just the quiet of the night. I'm yours, Clara, if you'll have me." The tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling, the smile he had given back to her. "Jack Morrow," she said, her voice clear and strong. "You came here looking for peace. I didn't have any to give. I only had a war. And you stood with me. You didn't walk away. You showed me that needing someone isn't a weakness. It's a strength. You gave me back my home. You gave me back me. You gave me a future, my heart. It's been a closed, empty house for so long. And now it's full. It's full of you." She squeezed his hands. "I am yours. I will be your home. I will be your peace. Always." He leaned in and kissed her. It was not the desperate, hungry kiss of the barn, nor the slow, healing kiss of the fire. It was a kiss of promise. It was a kiss of forever. It was the kiss of a husband and a wife. The story ends, but it also begins. It ends with the two of them standing on the ridge as the last light fades, 2 small, strong figures against the vast, open land. But it begins there, too. Clara, now Clara Morrow, often stood on the porch of her new home. She would look out across the land, the grass growing, the fences strong, the water in the creek sparkling in the sun. She would rest her hand on her growing belly, a gentle, protective gesture. And she would look at the man with the limp, the man who was laughing as he showed a neighbor's boy how to whittle, his carved initials next to hers on the gate. The land was hers again. It was hers, not because she had a piece of paper, and not because she had won a war. It was hers because she had chosen to fight, not for dirt or for pride, but for love. And she had done it with a man who had seen her at her lowest, and who had never, ever let her fall. Thank you for listening to this story from Wild West. We truly hope you enjoyed it. We would love to know where you are listening from. So please, take a moment to comment and let us know. If you enjoyed this tale, we invite you to subscribe to our channel, From Wild West, so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories. Please share your thoughts on the story in English in the comments below. We read every one.